Hello, I'm Liao. It's been a while for me making svelte videos, and I've been looking through the comments and realized that some of you wanted to have like more in-depth about like svelte core, and a lot of you find it interesting watching me solving some of the svelte issues. And today I found one great issue, or rather a feature request in svelte that I think we can have a try, which covers some concepts that wasn't talked about in my previous contributing to svelte videos. So I guess you would like this video. Okay, so what is the issue? Let's take a look. So it's about adding const tag inside an if block. So if you're not familiar with what is the const tag, come over here. Well, if you have things like each block, say for example each name as character, you can have the character over here like this. Wait, I spelled it wrongly. Oh, missing C. You can have a character over here, and then you would loop through, right? And within each block, character is a new variable that's being declared over here in this each logic block. And within here, within this new place, like it's just like when you write if something. Oh, sorry. This is each block, right? So just more similar to you write character of name, like you write if for loop, you can declare more variables like let name sorry, not name, but say character 2 c2 equals to character plus character, right? You can do this in a for loop in JavaScript. So in svelte, in this each logic block, we have a const tag. So it's add const, just like at HTML, at debug, they are tags. Over here, you can declare this c2 equals to character plus character. And then you can use c2 just like how you would in a for loop, right? So now you see c2 is WWOORLLDD, right? So we have this in each block. Then block places in Svelte's templates where it creates a new block, a new scope, right? So for if, usually we don't create a new scope, right? So because we have if name, here we don't really declare a new variable, right? We just condition is a variable that you've already created. So it doesn't really create a new scope. So in our initial implementation of a const tag, you can't really create a something like this equals to name plus name, right? This does not work in if block simply because before the implementation of the const tag, we do not create a new scope, so you can't declare a variable within a scope. So there's no new scope being created for the if block. That's why you can't use a const tag. And to prevent you from using it, we throw a very nice error by telling you that you can only use const within each, then catch, svelte fragment, and component. Right? All this will create new stuff, right? A new scope, right? If you have await, promise, then you have a new scope, which is because you're declaring a new variable like result over here, and it is a new scope because the result is not declared outside. You can't use results anywhere else except within the await block inside here, right? So it's a new scope, so you can do this. And same thing for catch, same thing for svelte fragment and component, where you can declare let binding, and that let variables are new and only exist within that scope and not being used outside. So if does not have a new scope, and that's why we does not support const tag. But let's create a new scope and let's allow if block to have const, right? Because if you read these issues, you find that it's useful. It is useful, and the reason of why we does not support is just because we are lazy. right? It's just a new concept that we want to try it out, and I guess people likes it, and I guess they have a reason why you want to have a constant within if, because this allows you to if certain condition, and then only in this condition that pass, like if selected, if it's not undefined or length is at least greater than 1, then you can get the first element, right? This select variable only makes sense in here. So this is definitely useful. So we're gonna add this in, right? And I'm gonna write it live in this video, and you're gonna take a look with me on how we can do that. Okay, so first thing first, let's take a look at the bundle outputs, right? Here I'm gonna just have name over here. I guess it's a bit hard to read from this REPL. It's useful to look at the compiled results, but let's open this in our IDE, shall we? So let me just, I think this is good enough. Let's copy this and let's come over to an IDE. I created a my svelte project, initialized with the svelte template. So we're gonna build the entry file and gonna build a we'll bundle and build our components into this public folder, right? So I'm gonna yarn build. Let me see, is it small enough, big enough? I think we've yarn build. Okay, we've built our content, and here you see this is our code. Let's do it side by side. If block, right? So here we create a if block. Let's see, if block, we create if. Okay, hold on. I think something is missing. Export let, because the name does not change. So in the if block, it doesn't use the context for the name, right? Because name is not changed, it's a constant, and it's declared over here as a constant. So let me just export let so that Svelte will see it as a variable that can be changed. And now you can see that it looks slightly different now. When we create if block, we'll pass in the context, ctx context, and then you create the if block, right? So this context will come in here. We'll get a name for here, and when we want to, if name changes, then we will have to update. P is for update, and if name is deleted, then you have destroyed, right? But if it wasn't there before and then the condition changed where name is previously undefined or falsy now is truly, then you have to create if block. So you have to create if block over here where you pass in context, and yeah, you have the create and mount here, right? So this context is like the scope thing, right? So it's like where you get all the variables that you use, right? Inside if block, you will see that we get the name from like 0th element, right? We get name from here. So if I come over here and do like the each block with name as character, build this, you see that this is also when I create each block, same thing. You see I will create each block in the for loop, looping through all the names. We create each block and we pass in the each context. Okay, so each context gives us more things, because over here for each loop, for each element, you're looping through a name, right? So in the each context, if you take a look over here, we'll have one more extra item, one, which is the current item, the list I index. Okay, so which means in the each block, you will see that if you're using character, you will get from context I, and if you're using name, same thing, it's the context 0, right? Context 1, context 0. So instead of unlike if where you just pass in context already, we get a get each context because you want to pass in extra things like the current character. Right. So if we declared some const stack over here, like c2 equals to character plus character, what you see, okay, let me just use this as well. What you see is that now in the get each context, we're gonna have a new constant called constant 0, which will be assigned to the second element, which is built using character plus character, right? So now later on in each block, you can see that we are using this C2 over here, right? So all this is to tell you that when we're creating each block, we don't just pass in context, pass in and get each context over here. Meaning if you want to have something later on for if block, we can also do something like get function get if block, if context, right? And then we can have a child context. Well, the reason of having a child context is such that it's like a scope, right? So new thing when you create a slice of 0 to the length, right? Actually just you create a new instance of the array, right? Slice will always return you a new array, and we are not slicing anything. We are slicing from 0 to the length. So this will create you a new copy of the array. And the good thing of doing this is that if you're adding new things into the child context, it does not really affect the from the outside. You don't really access it, although you can't do that technically, because all the codes we generate by svelte, you don't really have a way to access this child context and change anything you like, right? But it's just technically sound that when we create a new scope, we will create a new slice of the array, and here we can return child context. Of course, if you declare something, we probably will have a same thing like this, where you can declare new characters and assign it to an array like this, right? So this is, and then over here we will have to remember to go if block and pass this in both places like this. And that's how probably the output of if block would look like when we have a const stack, right? So we don't have to always have this get if context. Only if we need, then we will create this if tag. So of course we will in our code later on, we will have to check whether is there a const stack. If there is, then we don't. Then we create this get if context function. If we don't, then we don't have to create this function, and we just pass context directly. So far so good. I hope you follow so far along. So so you have the idea of like how the direction or how we're gonna write this out. Right now, it's more of a figure out which part of the code that does all this and spring the whole thing along. Right, so here I have already cloned a svelte repo. Usually I will run yarn dev to constantly build, watch and build my code changes. And the thing is that I have already linked this local like svelte folder. I run yarn link to link this svelte, right? And over here in my svelte project, I run yarn link svelte to link the svelte in this directory to the node modules of my svelte project. So every time I make changes, I built here a new I will build my latest code over here, and then when I'm using yarn build, in my svelte project, I'm always using the latest svelte that I just written. Of course, I can have test cases in the svelte to do like TDD and test it out, but I guess that would take a while in the video, so I'm gonna skip. Probably I'm not gonna include that in this video. So I'm just gonna build this code over here in real time, just this component, and take a look at. We're gonna hopefully, I don't want to drag it too long, and hopefully we can cover some of those basic cases that we can think of. Right. So here I'm gonna have const. Let's see, n2 equals to name plus name, right? And yeah, you would want to do n2 instead of having like an n2 equals to name plus name, right? Because name could be undefined and falsy and stuff like that, and you just don't want to bother of concatenating it and create n2. You just want to get n2 1 when like if name is Trudy, right? So you do this and you will use n2 over here and try to build. Oops, sorry. This here, when you try to build, run into error. It says constant can also be used here. So we're gonna, first thing is we're gonna lift this band for if tag, for if block, right? So I'm gonna go to my svelte. I'm gonna search for this line, and it's in compiler error. Let me zoom in a bit so that you can see clearly. This is the invalid const placement. I'm gonna search for this. Where do we print through this compiler error? And it's here. Invalid. It's in the const tag. So you will check whether the parent type is within an allowed parent type. Right. So what are the allowed parent type now is each catch then inline slot. Right. We're gonna add if block, and of course we want to have else block as well. If else, right? So we're gonna add this too, and now I've made changes. Since we are constantly building, right? Let's try and build again. Yeah, it now works, but of course no more errors. But now we have to handle like this. We're not had like a new errors coming out. So what should we do, right? So basically, I've already figured out most of the difficulties in implementing const tag for the each block, the catch then and other stuff, right? So how about just let's go to if block, right, over here, the nodes, and we're gonna take a look at the each block over here, and let's figure out what has to be copied over, right? Possibly same thing to handle const. Now you handle it for if block, right? So let's see. You have to have const tags, right? This is definitely needed. So we're gonna import const tag. And how we're gonna have this is okay. We're gonna loop through the children. We're gonna pass in the children, and it will return us actual children and const tag. So it will actually no matter where your const tag is, like whether it's the first element, second element, third element, or something like that, when it's in the each tag, it will actually loop through and extract out the const tag, right? And then leave the children. So it will split them into two arrays, right? One is a const tag, one is a children. So that way you wouldn't have like some space in between, like here and after they are all collapsed into one space, right? And you would just have the actual children, right? So we need this. Let's copy this, and I think here, and in turn we probably don't have map children anymore, because if you go to get const tag, you see that it's mapping children over here already. It's done that for you. So probably we don't need this. We need to import get const tag. Okay. And one thing that I've mentioned is that you probably would have to create a new scope for your block, right? And you probably will do it before this, right? So your const tag will refer to this new scope. You don't leak this scope out. You create a new scope in the if block. Right, so here I'm gonna say this dot scope here, somewhere around here at the top. And so we need to declare this as well. Okay, let's see. We have const tag, and I think that's it for this if block. And let's take a look whether we have a else block, and we probably have to copy the same thing over. I'm gonna shift it over here. We can have const tag scope. We're gonna import this too, same thing. Get const tag over here like this, and then remove this over here. What else? Create a new scope. Okay, and I see there's an error over here. Let's take a look. What is this? So okay, I think we can delete this and close this tab. So here, the third argument is inode allow const tag. So you can only pass in nodes that allow const tag. And that's a reason. The reason is because you need to read the scope, because const tag node will create a new scope and declare a scope in property over here, right? And since we just added for if block and the else block, we should make if block and else block also node that allows const tag. If block, else block. Okay, so now no more error, right? Same thing with else block. No more errors, right? So we've extracted the const tag and children, assign it over here, so for us to use later on. Right now, if you try to, I believe you try to build, the same error is gone. The error that you saw just now is because the const tag is within the children itself. So later on, when you try to do something with it, it does not know how to handle it. But we extract it out as a separate array called the const tags, and we handle them separately, right? So, so here we make changes to compiler compile nodes folder. The right is compiler compile nodes. This is the base AST for svelte components, right? So we make changes on here, extracting const tag and stuff like that. Now, next thing we need to do is to make changes in the render DOM and render SSR folder. Basically, we're going to touch the code where it generates a different JavaScript code to handle const tag, right? So in CSR, in client-side rendering or the render DOM part, as we've seen just now, this is the render DOM code. We'll have to create a get if context function, get each context function, and get if context function. You can create a new one to assign context inside, right? And render SSR is something we're gonna take a look later on. So let's come back. Actually, you know what? Although I say we don't have to create test cases, but I feel like we just create nonetheless. It will be easier for us on testing multiple scenarios. I'm gonna create some easy test case. If const tag if. Okay, so here I'm gonna have a simple one. If block, if boxes, const box equals to boxes. Okay, boxes dot length greater than 0, boxes 0, and then a box width. Maybe we create a few more. Const width equals a box width. Oh wait, let me just do some destructuring, right? Width and height. Let's say width times height. If. Okay, and spotlight boxes, right? Yep, correct. So you couldn't do exactly do like box equal boxes over here and do like this with a reactive declaration, because boxes box could be undefined and you can't destructure, right? You only want to destructure this if boxes is more than zero, more than zero, it's at least one element, right? Of course, you can do some if case and stuff like that, but yeah, it's just, it'll be useful if you have an if block to do this for you. So here in the conf, I'm gonna say props equals to, let's see, boxes equals to, just create a, okay, I'm gonna not doing anything, and we have empty HTML, and then component boxes equals to one item with a width 20, height 40, and then we will have our HTML to look like this. I think let's just wrap it with a div. Gonna have div 20 times 40 div, and that's it. And probably we can remove this again. Oh, I think boxes have to be in an array first, right? And assert it to be empty string. Okay, gonna add a solo goes through, so we're gonna just run this and not other test cases. And we're gonna have if else as well. Here we have if length, okay, if I gonna have, okay, like this, I think a simple condition, else if boxes dot length greater than 0, and then this is greater than 1, then I have two boxes, box 1, box 2, and I can have with, I think just leave it like this, goes to box 2 dot width, box 2 dot height. Okay, so same thing over here. Here we're gonna have one item will be like this, two items will have 30, 60, 30, 50, 30 and 50, and 0 back to empty, right? So I think these two cases kind of covered most of the things that we're gonna test later on, right? One is a simple one, if something, show something, else nothing, and multiple condition, if else, and final else would be const maybe length equals, I think just leave it, just don't have anything, never mind, it's okay. That would be the next one, else, I think this is else if, and then this is else. I'm gonna have an else that looks like this, else const length equals to boxes dot length, although we know it's always I think this one we say length equals to 2, length equals to 1, and then else const length is boxes length and div length, right? Why use boxes? Like, how do you come up with test cases? Well, just made it up along the way. I just feel like this is there's no pattern that I'm following. I think this should be this case, and else if should be this case. Okay, so here, if we have, if we're passing empty, then we're gonna div is 0, right? If you're passing more, right, then this will looks like div for div, right? So to run test cases, you run yarn quick test. Quick test is faster because you don't have to recompile the thing. Reference error. Okay, and so far so good. No error, because it's not yet working. So let's try to write it out. At least it does not have the error that we've seen early on, like to do implement const tag, or you cannot use const tag, everything. Right. So first thing is we do the render DOM first, right? And if you, I think since we're gonna show more stuff over Svelte core, I think here one thing you can do is you can write skip if SSR true for now. So later on you can have less errors coming out. Because I see the errors are there's a lot of tests that is running, right? 10 of them. But if you skip SSR, then you have less. If you try to skip even hydration, skip if hydration. Is it hydration or hydrate? I can't remember. Let's wait. I think it's skip if hydrate. Then you have only 3 test cases, right? The CSR one, the render DOM on the client side rendering one. So first, it does not work. Well, if you take a look at the output, as I said, we need the get if block over here so that we can add for the width, right? We need to provide something for the width. So let's do it. Okay. So how do we do that? Same thing as the render, like how we do for the compound node over here. Can go over to the render DOM if block. Let's close and open up the render DOM each block, and you can see what we're missing for const tag, right? Const tag. So add const tag context over here in the construction. So if block wrapper, this is in the each block wrapper, so we're gonna do that over here. Let's see where we can do let's see. Okay. Okay, I think we are gonna do it over here in the create branches. I'm gonna create different branch for different, let's see. Yeah, we're gonna create branches for if else and stuff like that, right? So each branches we're gonna create a new block over here. So I believe we can add it in here in the if block branch wrapper, right? The reason, if you compare the two, here we have adding dependencies and stuff like that. Node context, it's more of in here, right? It's like block child. It's more here rather than the if block. If you see where I'm coming for, I think that this is being abstracted into the if block branch, right? Yeah, so there could be more explanation to that, but I guess you just look at the code, read a bit more. I don't think I can cover that enough in the video, right? But as you can see, not big deal to copy this over, paste it in. Yeah, you want to see how this is implemented, probably you can take a read at the code and figure it out. You can always ask questions if you have later on. But I think this one has already abstracted all the things that, all the necessary codes to extract and do a lot of stuff in for the const tag. Because we have done this for the each block, the then catch components and stuff, right? So that's why it's like its own helper function that abstracts out all the things out here. Const stack, what else we missing? I think in the render block, so this is a get each context place where you have this. So we're gonna create a get if context form for the if block, right? So this is in the render method. So we're gonna go render and see where it is. Render, where are you? Render, render. Okay, in the render, right? So in the render, okay, so here we have, let me open it up a bit. But before that, since we did make changes, let's take a look at how this change will affect our code right now. In quick test, looks slightly different now. We don't have the undefined error. Well, what happens is that if you compare the output, whoops, did I just close my VS Code? Sorry. If you come over here to look at my svelte project, if you look at the bundle over here, if you search for N2, you see N2 over here, right? If you look for C2, you can't see C2, you only see context 2, right? So what have changed just now by adding that, by doing that extra line in the if and the render DOM part. Now if you search for N2, we've replaced this over here. And now since no longer accessing the N2 variable, you don't run into accessing variable undefined variable, right? It works now, except that context 5 has undefined value, has no value at all, right? So let's continue. Let's continue with our code. So what's next we need to do is to figure out where to add the get if block, right? So render is in the render function, and this is the render of actually a if block wrapper. And what it does is actually, because if block, it keeps a list of the branches, right? So if you have if and that's all, then this branches array has only one branch, right? If you have if else, then you have 2 branches. If you have if else, you have 3 branches, right? So I believe in here, when we try to render something, what we do is we loop through branches and try to render them, right? These branches for each and render each branch. So we're gonna come over here and take a look at where we can insert this, right? And a high level of this render function for if block is that there's 3 scenarios. One is the render simple, right? Render simple, if you look, if you try to look where it's being called, then render simple, if you look at the output, render simple is usually a simple if block with only if and one condition, right? If you come back to the code over here, you see that render simple is when you don't have an else. You only have if. You don't have else or else if, right? So we just let's fix the render simple first, the render simple case first, right? So here we have to add the get if context, right? Let's see, branches 0. We can copy some of this in here. Where are you? Const text. I just paste this in here. Branch. I don't have a name yet, But this one, if you search for get each context, you'll see that this is created like just get a unique name, right? So we can do that as well. We can come over here and get a unique name, if context, get if context, replace it here, and we just need this. And let's try to build this. Okay, now we get an error. Okay, we can't declare duplicate declaration. Okay, let's try again. Renderer is not defined. What's wrong? This dot renderer, I believe. Okay, so here let's fix, I think, this one, and let's try and build. Oops, sorry, not this here again. And build. It works ish. You have if context now. If wait, do you have? Why is it not having this dot renderer dot blocks dot push? Hold on, let me see. Build this, and let's if no context. We still haven't created a get if context. What's wrong with this? Let's see, probably we're not coming into this line. Render simple. Okay, we do come in and then we do push this new block. Something is not going right. Block start push. I think this is correct. Get if context. I think because we haven't used it and it's being removed by rollup, because this is bundled by rollup. Let's use this function. Get if context. We can come over here and just gonna wrap it over here, right? Just this function. Wrap it with the if, and then also when we have to create a new block over here, we also have to wrap it. Right, let's build this again. And if block context, get if block context. You see that we are using it here. Right, and then now you see that if block context define constant 0, which is child context 5, and this is here, and you use this, right? So which means if I try to run and serve the public folder, probably you couldn't tell, but this is the N2, right? It works. It works. Let's make sure that we know that this is N2. N2 over here. Just remove everything that's not unrelated. Save this. Yes, build again. And let's refresh. N2. Whoa, it works. And that's how easy it is. Hopefully, I guess it is easy. But we haven't figured out other cases. So now it's time for us to see. Of course, we can't really use this every time. We don't have to do this every time, right? Because you have to make sure that here we need to check if we need to get if context. so something like, let's declare ctx equals to context, right? So we reuse this variable over here, and then if the length is greater than 0, then only we do this. And ctx equals to get if context ctx. Oops, sorry. Get if context bracket c, and then here is the original ctx, right? This is a node. Okay. Yeah. So we will, if we only do this when the context is have if we have context, and then we only do that, we only edit the get if block context in, and also use the get if context only in that case. If not, we still fall back to the context. So I haven't saved this, so we haven't built this. But let's see if I remove n2 right now, and we're just using name. We save this. When you try to build, you see that current implementation always creates this if block context, although in here you do nothing but create a new slice. We don't have to do that because by default, before we have this context, we don't have this at all, right? There's no new scope being created. So if I come over here and save this, because I need to replace the context over here. So now we're going to use the context instead. Here as well. Let's save this. And now if I try to build, see the output is that now I am going back to use the context directly. But if I add n2 and save and build, see that now we're using the get if block context with all this, right? So with a compile approach, we can be smart on only adding new codes if necessary for new features. And if you don't have you don't use those features, you can fall back always. Try to keep the final compile output lean. Don't have to include unnecessary code, even if it's just like no op. So we don't even have to create that no op in the first place. So this is how we're gonna do it. So now we are done with render simple, but we have to do it for render other things as well. And render, so there's render compound and with outros and render compound. Right? So with outros and without outros, it's a bit different because you have to switch between you have to wait for it to remove, then only you create new if block or something like that. I'm not quite sure about what it is, but if you have an out transition, then you have special handling on removing things and adding them. So let's take a look at how the code would be different if you have a const stack. If you have else block, right? So here I'm gonna have a equals to 2, 1, and a. Okay, it's a simple const stack over here. Here you see that now I have create if block, create else block, and here we have this function called select block type. So based on condition, you return whether it's a which function it is, and select you'll create a current block type where basically this is a dynamic variable where it depends on what block you create. And here you are creating the block, basically create an if block just like we had previously, right? And then this is the one where you do the create and mount it on the and if we call this function again, and if condition changes, we call this function again and return a new function, a new block from here. If and else you switch it, then we will have to basically remove the existing one and then create a new one and then mount it, create them and mount it, right? And because this, when it returns, could be undefined as well, because if you have multiple scenarios like else if name equals to ha, so you don't have an else, then if you build this, you realize that the select, you have if block 1 and if block, and the select will return this or that, and there's no else block to return, right? Because you don't have an else block. So in those cases, if you check if it's not there, then you will not create, right? This if block will be a undefined now. Right, so you only create when it's not undefined. So here we need to make changes a bit, right? So I think this video has been dragging a while, so I'm not gonna type it out exactly and how. Probably I'm not gonna type it out exactly how the implementation, and rather I'm gonna show you what I think, how I think the final output compile code should look like. And I will attach the MR, I will attach the pull request to the video description, and then you can take a read and figure it out yourself. Okay, so here I probably will change this to look like select block type, right? So meaning each block you have a different block type, and actually each of them will have its own context. If context, right? Because you can here declare N2 and here you declare A, right? They are separate contexts. So we probably will gonna have something like function get if one context ctx return child context, right? You know what this is, right? Declare like child context. I'm just gonna say n2 equals to something, blah blah blah, right? And you have n2 as if text2, which is a. Okay, of course it does not look like this. You know how it looks like. We saw that earlier on. Now we have this two if context because we have two if blocks, and I'm thinking that we can have a function called select block context, and we pass in the context. Or rather, we pass in the block type. So we don't have to repeat this condition over here. We're just based on the block type, right? If block type equals to create if block, then we return. Okay, I think we can take in a context as well, right? Block type and context. So we can call directly. So this is return this. If block type equals to create block 1, then I return this, and else we return ctx, right? So we only have this if it creates a context, right? So if this block does not create a context, there's no new context created, then we just don't do anything, and fallback is always return the context, right? So here, so we can check which block that needs a context. We create a context and add it over here. And here, we probably will can do this like, right? If here, if current block type, then this will be select block context with the current block type. Like this, we're gonna pass in this. Right? And if it's nothing, then it will always be return context for me. Of course, none of the block, if this is empty as well, none of the block, then we don't have the select block types as well. You probably know how to do that, right? We saw that earlier on. And of course, we need to copy this and also have it over here, right? Select block context over here when we create new blocks. And I believe that's it, right? That's basically how the compile output would change to accommodate this branches, right? So we've seen how we do for the client side, And let's just quickly swing over and take a look at how we can, how would it be different if we are built for SSR, right? So here I've set up my setup where if I pass SSR equals to true, build, then basically I'm going to build a SSR version of the code that looks like this. Okay. Let's see. Constack. SSR context. Probably not gonna go into how we're gonna change that. But if you look at the code over here, realize that, okay, because there's a lot of spaces over here, that's why there's a lot of spaces that is included, white spaces that's being included in the final output. But this is how the app is being rendered, this component. If its name is true, let me just collapse it a bit, right? If name is true, let me remove white space as well, right? So you get this string, right, which is n2 equal colon and then n2. And if it's else, then you have okay, let me do this, right? And if it's else, you get name equals haha, right? The next else if, and if it's true, okay, then you have escape A. If it's not, then you have empty string, right? Basically, this is explaining this, right? So what we need to do is over here, we need to change this. Let's see. I think we can change this to an IIFE, which means immediately invoked function expression. Can change it to looks like this. Return. Right. So nothing has changed. This function is immediately being called and then you return this. So right now it looks the same. But here we can create a new scope. Basically, we can declare functions, or we can run code in here only when it runs past here, right? So we can't really have like n2 equals name plus name here because it's incorrect because we run this even though where name is not true. So we can only run it in this expression, and we could use like comma expression, like running a few expression over here, and then finally declare return n2 equals to something. I think that would work as well. But another simpler, maybe more code, hopefully simpler. I'm not sure. Later on we can try. See whether you can implement that. But for implementing using a comma expression, what we will have to do is to declare ahead of time all the variable that we're gonna use, like let n2 over here, a over here, right? In this way, if immediately invoke function expression, we create a new scope over here, right? So which means we can actually just copy the n2 equals name plus name over here, exactly how we write. There's no new handling that we need to do, and now we can use n2, right? Same thing over here. A, if we have it, then we have to do this, right? Wrap it with this, and yeah, const A equals to 1, something like that, and that will work. So this is for SSR, right? I believe if you run this, yeah, if you read at the code, you know it works, right? And so this is how we're gonna support for SSR, right? So and I guess I can leave it as an exercise if you wanna do, and don't worry if you want to read the actual final out code. I will leave the link to the pull request in the description and you can take a look. And I guess that's it for this video. It's a long, windy video for me just talking non-stop about a lot of concepts. Hopefully it's not too confusing for you. But I hope you learned something. If I do some conclusion is that we learn about scope, and we learn how we can create new scope, especially in a render DOM scenario where you basically create a new function called get context, right? And then you wrap the context and return a new context, and that's where you define new context to a block. And that's it. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment down in the section below. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.